He was driving past the playground when he saw her. Not in a memory, not in a dream, but holding two crying twins who looked exactly like him. This story is completely fictional and written by the author of this channel. Listen until the end, it gets truly emotional and unforgettable. Michael had not planned to slow down that morning. His schedule was packed with meetings, calls, and decisions that affected thousands of people, and his black car usually moved through the city like it owned the road. But traffic forced him onto a quieter street, one he had not driven through in years, lined with old trees, modest apartment buildings, and a small, worn playground squeezed between them. Children's laughter cut through the hum of the engine, sharp and unexpected, and for reasons he could not explain, his foot eased off the accelerator. He glanced toward the playground without any real interest at first, his thoughts still tangled in contracts and numbers, until one single moment tore him out of that world completely. Near a cracked bench, a woman was crouched on the ground, her arms wrapped around two small boys who were crying at the same time, their voices overlapping in panicked sobs. She spoke to them softly, brushing their hair back, rocking them with a patience that came not from practice, but from love. Michael's breath caught in his chest before his mind could stop it. He knew that posture. He knew that voice. The world seemed to narrow, sound fading until all he could hear was the blood rushing in his ears. He had not seen her in years, yet recognition was instant and merciless. Her dark hair was pulled back simply, her face thinner than he remembered, marked by exhaustion that life carves into people quietly and without permission. But her eyes were the same brown eyes that had once looked at him with trust, then disappointment, then heartbreak. Emma. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as memories he had buried surged to the surface, refusing to stay silent. Late nights, promises he had made too easily, the morning he had walked away telling himself it was necessary, telling himself she would be fine without him. He had built an empire on those choices, convinced that sacrifice was the price of success. Seeing her there shattered that illusion in a single second. Then he saw the boys more clearly. They were identical, small and fragile, with dark hair and striking blue eyes that mirrored his own reflection in every mirror he owned. One clutched Emma's jacket with desperate fingers, the other pressed his face into her shoulder, trembling as she murmured reassurances meant to steady both of them. Michael's chest tightened painfully as a terrible, undeniable thought formed, one his mind tried to reject even as his heart recognized the truth. The car rolled to a stop without him fully realizing it. He sat frozen, watching a life he had never known unfold just meters away. Emma lifted one of the boys into her arms, whispering something that made him calm slightly, while the other wiped his tears with the back of his hand and leaned into her side. It was a scene so ordinary, and so devastating that it felt unreal, as if he were witnessing someone else's story instead of his own consequences. For a brief moment, Emma looked up. Their eyes met across the distance, and time seemed to break. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by something harder to name, something guarded and weary. She did not smile. She did not wave. She simply pulled the boys closer to her, instinctively placing herself between them and the world, then looked away as if he were nothing more than a stranger passing by. Michael stayed where he was, heart pounding, unable to move, unable to breathe properly, knowing with a certainty that terrified him more than any business risk ever had that his life had just changed forever, and that no amount of money, power, or control could undo what he was about to face. Michael did not remember how long he sat in the car after Emma turned away. The engine idled softly, the sound almost mocking in its normality, while inside him everything had fallen into chaos. He watched her from behind the windshield as she settled the twins onto the swings, pushing them gently, still murmuring to them with the same calm, steady tone. It was the voice of someone who had learned to be strong not by choice, but by necessity. Every small movement she made felt intimate, private, as if he were intruding on a life he had forfeited the right to witness. He finally forced himself to step out of the car. The door closed behind him with a dull sound that seemed far too loud, and Emma stiffened instantly, her shoulders tightening before she even turned around. She knew. He could tell by the way she straightened, by the way she positioned herself slightly in front of the boys, as if shielding them from something dangerous. That small instinct cut deeper than any accusation ever could. "Emma," Michael said quietly, his voice unfamiliar even to himself. She turned slowly, her expression carefully neutral, almost polite. The boys glanced at him with curiosity through their tears, their identical blue eyes studying him without fear, without recognition. That was what hurt the most. To them, he was nothing. "I don't know you," Emma said calmly, though her hands trembled just enough to betray her effort. "You should go." The words were measured, controlled, and painfully deliberate. Michael opened his mouth to argue, to explain, to say anything that might stop her from erasing him so completely, but nothing came out right. Years of confidence failed him in the face of one woman and 2 children who should have been part of his life. "I just want to talk," he said finally. "Please." Emma looked down at the twins, smoothing their hair, wiping the last traces of tears from their cheeks. She took a deep breath, then looked back at him with eyes that no longer held hope, only resolve. "There is nothing to talk about," she replied. "You made your choice a long time ago." She gathered the boys, lifting one onto her hip while the other held her hand, and began to walk away. Michael stood frozen, watching her retreat, every step echoing with the weight of everything he had lost. He felt an unfamiliar panic rise in his chest, sharp and uncontrollable. "Wait," he said, louder now, unable to stop himself. Emma paused but did not turn around. For a moment, Michael thought she might actually listen, that this was his chance to say something meaningful. Instead, she spoke without facing him. "Don't follow us," she said quietly. "You will only confuse them. And me." She walked away without another word, disappearing down the sidewalk with the twins, leaving Michael standing alone beside a playground that suddenly felt unbearably empty. He did not chase her. He did not call after her again. He simply stood there, hands clenched at his sides, staring at the space she had occupied moments earlier. For the first time in his life, Michael understood what it meant to be powerless. No negotiation, no deal, no carefully calculated strategy could undo what had already happened. He got back into his car eventually, but instead of driving away, he stayed parked across the street, watching from a distance as if proximity alone might somehow bridge the years between them. And deep inside, a quiet, terrifying realization took root. He was not leaving this place, not today, and not without answers, no matter how much it hurt. Michael did not leave the neighborhood that day. He told himself he would, that it was the reasonable thing to do, but reason had already lost its grip on him. Instead of returning to his office, he drove aimlessly through nearby streets until evening settled in, replaying every second of what he had seen. The image of Emma kneeling beside the twins followed him relentlessly, refusing to fade no matter how hard he tried to replace it with numbers, schedules, or logic. That night, his penthouse felt colder than ever. The city lights below shimmered indifferently, a reminder of the life he had built brick by brick while something far more important had slipped through his fingers. Michael poured himself a drink and let it sit untouched on the counter. His thoughts drifted backward, to the final months with Emma, to how often he had postponed conversations, convinced there would always be time later. He remembered how she had looked at him that last morning, her eyes searching his face as if she were already bracing for disappointment. She had been. Sleep came only in fragments. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the twins again. Their faces were burned into his mind now, not as an abstract idea, but as living proof of a life he had missed entirely. He wondered how old they were, whether they slept through the night, whether they liked stories or music, whether they were afraid of the dark. The questions stacked up endlessly, each one a quiet accusation. The next morning, Michael returned to the playground. He told himself he would keep his distance, that he would not interfere, but the truth was simpler. He needed to see them again, if only to reassure himself that they were real and not a cruel illusion. He parked farther away this time and waited. Emma arrived shortly after noon. She looked more tired in daylight, the strain impossible to hide, yet there was something unbreakable in the way she moved. The twins ran ahead of her, their laughter echoing across the playground as if nothing in the world could touch them. Michael stayed still, watching from afar, his chest tightening with something that felt dangerously close to longing. He noticed details he had missed before. One twin was more cautious, pausing before climbing, checking his footing carefully. The other was fearless, racing ahead with complete trust that someone would catch him if he fell. Emma knew this. She watched them differently, adjusting her attention instinctively, catching one before he tripped while encouraging the other to be brave. Michael realized then that she had learned every part of them without him. Emma glanced in his direction once, her gaze sharp and knowing. She had expected him. Instead of anger, there was resignation in her eyes, as if she had already accepted that the past had chosen to resurface whether she wanted it to or not. She did not approach him. She did not signal him to leave. She simply turned back to the boys, drawing them closer, anchoring herself to them. Michael stayed until they left again, resisting every impulse to follow. When they were gone, he remained seated on the bench, staring at the empty swings swaying gently in the wind. The silence felt heavier than any confrontation. For the first time, Michael understood that this was not a moment he could fix quickly or cleanly. There would be no single conversation, no decisive gesture that erased years of absence. What stood between him and Emma was not just anger or pain, but time itself, and the quiet life she had built without him. As he finally stood to leave, one thought settled firmly in his mind, steady and unyielding. He would not disappear again. Whatever it took, whatever it cost, he would face the consequences of the choices he had made. And whether Emma allowed him close or kept him at a distance, Michael knew that the days of running from his past were over. Michael began to notice how quickly routine replaced shock. What had felt unreal only days ago was now becoming a quiet obsession, shaping every decision he made. He adjusted his schedule without telling anyone, canceled meetings he would once have considered untouchable, and found himself returning to the same neighborhood again and again, always keeping a careful distance. He did not want to frighten Emma, did not want to give her another reason to close herself off completely. From his car, from across the street, from the edge of the playground, he observed without interfering. It was a strange position for a man who was used to control, to influence, to command outcomes. Here, he had none of that power. He was just a man watching a woman live a life he had not been part of. Emma's days followed a pattern that slowly revealed itself to him. Mornings were quieter, filled with careful conversations and gentle instructions as she guided the twins through simple routines. Afternoons were louder, messier, marked by scraped knees, sudden tears, and quick laughter that returned as easily as it vanished. Michael watched her respond to every emotion with instinctive patience, never raising her voice, never turning away. It struck him painfully that she had become everything he once assumed she already was, without him. The twins fascinated him in different ways. He began to recognize their personalities, even from afar. One boy clung closer to Emma, frequently checking to see if she was watching, his small hand always ready to reach for hers. The other wandered farther, fearless and curious, trusting the world to catch him. Michael saw himself reflected in both of them, and that realization unsettled him more than he expected. One afternoon, Emma finally approached him. She did not come angrily or hesitantly. She walked toward him with deliberate calm, leaving the twins playing under the watchful eye of another parent nearby. When she stopped a few steps away, Michael stood instinctively, unsure whether to speak or wait. "You can't keep doing this," she said quietly. He nodded once. "I know." Her eyes searched his face, not for remorse, but for intention. "Then why are you here?" Michael took a breath, choosing honesty over pride. "Because if I leave again, I'll never forgive myself." Emma looked away for a moment, her jaw tightening. Forgiveness isn't something you get to demand, she replied. Not from me. And not from them. I'm not asking for it, he said. I'm asking for time. She studied him carefully, as if weighing every word against years of disappointment. Time doesn't erase absence, she said. No, Michael agreed. But absence already did enough damage. The silence between them was heavy, but it was no longer hostile. Emma glanced back toward the twins, then returned her gaze to him. They don't know who you are, she said firmly. And until I decide otherwise, that won't change. Michael nodded, accepting the boundary without argument. I understand. Emma turned to leave, then paused. If you're going to be here, she added, be honest. Don't hide behind distance and guilt. They deserve better than that. She walked away before he could respond, leaving him standing alone with words that felt both like a warning and an opening. Michael watched her rejoin the twins, her posture softening instantly as she knelt to speak to them. He felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper in his chest. For the first time since he had seen her again, Michael understood that this was no longer about reclaiming something he had lost. It was about becoming someone worthy of being present now. And that, he knew, would take far more than regret. Michael took Emma's words seriously. He stopped waiting across the street and stopped pretending that distance alone counted as respect. Instead, he chose consistency. Each day, at roughly the same hour, he arrived at the playground and sat on the far bench, never too close, never too far, allowing his presence to become predictable rather than intrusive. He did not approach the twins. He did not call out to Emma. He simply showed up and stayed, even when it felt unbearable. Emma noticed, of course. She noticed everything. At first, she remained tense, her shoulders tight whenever she sensed him nearby. Over time, however, that tension softened into vigilance rather than alarm. Michael was no longer a sudden disruption, he was a quiet fact. That change unsettled her in a way she did not want to examine too closely. The twins began to notice him as well. Children were perceptive in ways adults often underestimated. They saw patterns, repetition, familiarity. The fearless one, whose curiosity always pushed him forward, started glancing toward Michael's bench with open interest. The cautious one watched longer, studying him the way he studied the world, carefully and without trust. Michael felt the weight of those small looks like a test he did not yet deserve to pass. One afternoon, the fearless twin broke away from the swings and ran a few steps toward Michael before stopping abruptly, as if an invisible line had been drawn on the ground. He stared at Michael, head tilted, eyes bright with curiosity. Michael did not move. He did not smile or wave. He simply looked back, calm and open, letting the moment belong to the child. Emma reacted instantly, calling the boy back with a firm but gentle voice. He returned to her side, looking over his shoulder once more before letting her take his hand. She shot Michael a sharp look, not angry, but warning. Michael nodded in response, a silent acknowledgement that he understood. Boundaries mattered. He would not cross them. Later that day, as the twins played nearby, Emma approached him again. This time, her posture was less guarded, though her expression remained serious. They're starting to notice you, she said quietly. I know, Michael replied. That's why I haven't moved. She studied his face, searching for impatience, entitlement, anything that suggested expectation. Finding none, she exhaled slowly. You don't get to be important to them just because you want to be, she said. I know, he answered. I get to earn it. Or not. The simplicity of his response unsettled her. Emma had prepared herself for arguments, for justifications, for apologies delivered too late. She had not prepared for acceptance without pressure. That evening, after the twins had fallen asleep, Emma lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the day. She hated how part of her felt relief knowing Michael was nearby. She hated even more that another part of her felt hope, small and dangerous. She had survived years by believing she could carry everything alone. Letting someone else stay felt like stepping onto unstable ground. Meanwhile, Michael returned to his empty apartment and sat in silence, resisting the urge to call his assistants or fill the space with noise. For the first time in years, his thoughts were not about expansion, profit, or control. They were about patience. About learning to wait without demanding reward. Both of them understood, in their own way, that something irreversible had begun. Not a reconciliation. Not forgiveness. But a slow, uncertain movement forward, shaped by restraint rather than desire. And though either of them said it aloud, they both knew that the next step would require courage either of them was entirely sure they possessed. The 6th chapter of their story unfolded quietly, without dramatic confrontations or raised voices, and that was precisely what made it so heavy. Time passed, measured not in days but in repeated moments, in glances exchanged and words left unspoken. Michael continued to come to the playground every afternoon, rain or shine, and his presence slowly wove itself into the background of Emma's life like a sound you noticed only when it disappeared. Emma found herself watching him when she thought no one noticed. She watched how he never checked his phone, how he stayed until the twins grew tired and restless, how he left at the same time they did, never lingering as if hoping for more. It unsettled her because it felt deliberate, controlled in a way that did not demand forgiveness or affection. He was not trying to win her over. He was trying to be there. One afternoon, one of the twins tripped near the sandbox and began to cry. Emma rushed to him instantly, lifting him into her arms, murmuring comfort while brushing dirt from his knees. Michael rose halfway from the bench without thinking, stopping himself just as quickly. The instinct surprised him. He clenched his hands together, forcing himself to stay where he was, knowing that stepping in would only undo the fragile trust he was trying to build. Emma noticed. She always did. Later, when the twins were distracted with toy cars near the slide, she approached Michael again. This time, she did not sound defensive or tired. She sounded careful. "They get hurt easily," she said quietly. "Not just physically." Michael nodded. "So do I," he replied honestly. "That's why I won't rush them." Her eyes flickered with something close to emotion before she looked away. "You don't get credit for restraint," she said. "I know," he answered. "I'm not looking for it." They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the playground filling the space between them. Emma studied him with a new kind of attention, as if reassessing a familiar shape that no longer fit the memory she carried. "You've changed," she said finally. Michael did not deny it. "I had to. The man you knew couldn't stay." Emma felt a familiar ache tighten in her chest. "He should have," she said softly. Michael absorbed the words without defense. "You're right." That night, Emma struggled more than usual to fall asleep. The twins lay peacefully beside her, their small breaths steady and warm, but her thoughts were restless. She had spent years convincing herself that independence was safety, that relying on no one meant never being abandoned again. Yet watching Michael choose patience over proximity forced her to confront a painful truth. She was tired. Not weak, not broken, just tired of carrying everything alone. Meanwhile, Michael sat in his apartment surrounded by silence that no longer felt luxurious. He found himself thinking not about what he had lost, but about what he was learning. That love was not urgency. That presence mattered more than promises. That waiting without entitlement was harder than any risk he had ever taken. The next day, one of the twins waved at him from across the playground, shy and uncertain, as if testing whether he would respond. Michael lifted his hand slowly and waved back, keeping his distance. The boy smiled before running back to Emma, excitement clear in his movements. Emma saw it happen. Her heart skipped painfully, not with anger, but with fear of how easily hope could grow. She knelt to speak to her son, her voice gentle but serious, reminding him to stay close. As she looked up again, her eyes met Michael's across the space between them. For the first time, There was no warning in her gaze, no demand to leave, only a quiet acknowledgement. The boundary had not disappeared, but it had shifted. And both of them understood that once a boundary moved, it could never return to exactly where it had been before. The 7th chapter arrived with a truth Michael had not prepared for, one that did not announce itself loudly but changed everything once it surfaced. It began with a small detail, almost insignificant at first. One of the twins grew tired faster than usual, his steps slowing, his laughter fading into quiet irritation. Emma noticed immediately, lifting him into her arms with practiced ease, whispering reassurances while the other boy continued playing, unaware. Michael watched from his bench, unease settling deep in his chest. This was not the first time he had seen exhaustion in the child, but today it lingered longer, clung more stubbornly. Emma's face tightened just enough to reveal concern she did not voice. She carried the boy away from the playground sooner than usual, leaving without explanation. The pattern repeated itself over the following days. Small signs. Subtle changes. One twin growing pale after running, the other waiting patiently beside him, instinctively aware that something was wrong. Emma handled it quietly, efficiently, as she always did, but Michael could see the strain building behind her eyes. One afternoon, when the playground was nearly empty and the air felt heavy with approaching rain, Emma finally spoke. "You should know something," she said, not looking at him. Michael stood slowly, every muscle tense. "Tell me." She hesitated, then met his gaze directly. "One of them is sick." The words struck him harder than he expected, stealing the breath from his lungs. "How sick?" he asked, his voice controlled but brittle. "Enough," Emma replied. "It's not immediate. But it's not nothing." She turned away as if the conversation were already over, but Michael stepped closer, careful not to invade her space. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "Since before they were born," she said. "I learned to live with it." Michael felt something fracture inside him. She had carried this alone. Not just motherhood, not just loss, but fear layered on top of fear, every single day. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Emma's voice was steady when she replied. "Because I didn't need your money. And I didn't trust your presence." The honesty cut deep, but Michael did not argue. He nodded slowly. "What does he need?" he asked. She shook her head. "That's not your role." "Not yet," Michael agreed. "But I want it to be." Emma studied him for a long moment, searching for something that might betray him. Finding nothing, she looked away again. "Wanting doesn't change reality," she said. "No," Michael replied. "But staying does." That night, Michael did not sleep. He read everything he could: medical journals, studies, possibilities. For the first time in his life, money felt secondary, almost irrelevant, except as a tool he wished he had offered sooner. He did not contact lawyers or doctors. He did not make arrangements. He waited. The next day, Emma arrived at the playground later than usual, her movements slower, her face drawn. The sick twin clung to her more than before, his small arms wrapped tightly around her neck. Michael remained where he was, watching, fighting the instinct to rush forward. When Emma finally approached him again, her voice was quieter than he had ever heard it. "I don't need saving," she said. "And neither do they." Michael met her gaze, pain and determination crossing his face. "I know," he said. "But I want to help without taking over. Tell me how." She closed her eyes briefly, the weight of years pressing down on her shoulders. When she opened them again, there was exhaustion there, but also something else. Relief, perhaps, that she had not named out loud. "I don't know how to let someone share this," she admitted. Michael nodded. "Then we'll learn." Emma said nothing, but she did not walk away. She stayed there, standing beside him in silence while the twins played nearby, one quieter than the other, both unaware that the ground beneath their lives had shifted again. For Michael, The realization was devastating and clarifying all at once. This was no longer about proving he could stay. This was about accepting that staying would hurt, and choosing to do it anyway. The days after the truth surfaced felt heavier, as if the air itself resisted movement. Nothing outwardly dramatic happened, yet everything had changed. Michael noticed how Emma moved more carefully now, how her attention was split not just between two children, but between fear and routine. She refused to let the illness define their days, and that quiet resistance both impressed and unsettled him. Michael did not ask questions immediately. He understood that pushing for details would feel like an invasion, and he had already taken enough from her without permission. Instead, he adjusted himself again, as he had learned to do. He arrived earlier, left later, and stayed alert without hovering. When one twin tired quickly, Michael distracted the other from noticing. When Emma needed a moment to breathe, he created it without making it obvious. Emma noticed all of it. She noticed how he positioned himself instinctively closer to the weaker child during play, without touching, without drawing attention. She noticed how he watched for signs of discomfort the way a parent did, scanning posture and expression instead of relying on words. It frightened her because it felt natural, as though he had always known how to do this. One afternoon, the sick twin became dizzy and sat down abruptly near the slide. Emma rushed toward him, panic flaring before she could stop it. Michael was already there, kneeling nearby but not touching, speaking softly. "It's okay," he said calmly. "Sit with me for a second." The boy leaned against him without hesitation, resting his head against Michael's shoulder, as if instinct had decided before reason could interfere. Emma froze, her breath catching painfully in her chest. She expected herself to feel anger or fear. Instead, she felt something dangerously close to relief. Michael looked up at her, concern in his eyes but no triumph, no claim. "He's breathing fine," he said quietly. "Just tired." Emma nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you?" It was the first time she had said those words to him since the day they met again. Later, as the twins played quietly with toy cars, Emma finally allowed herself to sit beside Michael on the bench. The space between them was small but deliberate, a choice rather than an accident. "I don't want them to grow up afraid," she said suddenly. "I don't want sickness to be the center of their lives." Michael listened without interrupting. "Then it won't be," he said. "It will be something we manage, not something they become." The word "we" lingered between them. Emma noticed it immediately, her chest tightening. She did not correct him. That evening, after the twins were asleep, Emma lay awake longer than usual. For the first time, she admitted something she had refused to name before. She was tired of being strong alone. Tired of making every decision in isolation. Tired of carrying fear silently so her children would never see it. Across the city, Michael sat in his apartment, reviewing documents he had not touched in years. Medical options. Research. Possibilities. He moved carefully, anonymously, determined not to overwhelm Emma or turn help into control. For once, he was not trying to solve everything at once. He was trying to be steady. The next day, Emma found a note tucked into the pocket of her coat. It was simple, written carefully. "If you ever want information, not solutions, I can help find it. No pressure. No expectations." She read it twice before folding it neatly and placing it back. She did not respond. She did not need to. The absence of demand was the message. That afternoon, as the twins laughed softly over a shared toy, Emma watched Michael from the corner of her eye and felt something unfamiliar settle inside her. It was not forgiveness. It was not trust. It was the realization that pain did not always arrive alone. Sometimes it arrived with support that did not ask to be thanked. And for the first time since the day Michael had appeared at the playground, Emma allowed herself to believe that letting someone stay might not be the same as losing control. The breaking point did not arrive as a dramatic collapse, but as a slow erosion that neither of them could stop. It came in the form of a quiet doctor's appointment that Emma tried to attend alone. Michael noticed the envelope in her hand that morning, the way she folded it too carefully, the way her voice sounded steadier than it should have. He did not ask where she was going. He already knew. She returned later than usual, her steps slower, her shoulders heavier. The twins were unusually quiet, sensing the shift even if they did not understand it. Emma sat on the bench longer than normal, staring at the ground while the boys played with sticks and pebbles near her feet. Michael approached only when she finally looked up, her eyes glossy but determined. "It's progressing faster than they expected," she said, getting the words out before fear could choke them. "Not dangerously fast. Just faster." Michael felt the ground tilt beneath him, but he stayed still, anchoring himself so she would not have to. "What does that mean?" he asked gently. "It means more appointments," Emma replied. "More uncertainty. And less room for pretending everything is fine." Michael nodded slowly. "Then we stop pretending." That afternoon marked a shift neither of them could undo. Emma stopped shielding Michael from the details, not because she suddenly trusted him completely, but because exhaustion had worn down her resistance. She told him about the nights spent watching for signs she hoped would not appear, about the constant calculations she carried in her head, measuring joy against energy, play against risk. Michael listened without interrupting, without trying to fix anything. He understood now that listening was not passive. It was an act of responsibility. In the days that followed, he stepped closer, not physically, but structurally. He rearranged his life quietly, delegating work he once hoarded, refusing meetings without explanation. He began attending appointments only when Emma allowed it, sitting slightly behind her, letting her lead every conversation. He spoke only when asked, and when he did, it was careful and precise. The twins reacted in their own way. The healthier one became more protective, staying close to his brother, watching him with a seriousness no child should have to learn. The other grew clingier, seeking comfort in familiar arms, sometimes reaching for Michael without realizing it. Each time it happened, Michael felt a mix of joy and grief so sharp it nearly took his breath away. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows of Emma's apartment, the twins fell asleep early, curled together under one blanket. Emma stood in the kitchen, staring at nothing, her hands gripping the counter. Michael watched her struggle in silence before stepping closer, careful not to touch her without permission. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said quietly. Emma laughed once, bitter and tired. "I've been carrying it alone since the beginning." Michael met her gaze, his voice steady. "Not anymore. Even if you don't forgive me. Even if you don't trust me yet. I'm here." Something in her cracked then, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to let tears spill freely down her face. She turned away, ashamed of the vulnerability, but Michael did not retreat. He stayed exactly where he was, close enough to matter and far enough to respect her space. After a long moment, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "I know," Michael replied. "So am I." The honesty settled between them, raw and unfiltered. For the first time, Emma allowed herself to lean slightly against the counter instead of standing rigid, as if the act of admitting fear had taken something heavy off her shoulders. That night, after Michael left, Emma sat beside her sleeping children and watched them breathe. She realized that the story she had told herself for years, the one where strength meant solitude, was no longer sustainable. Strength, she was beginning to understand, might also mean allowing someone else to stand beside you when the road turned darker. And for Michael, driving home through the rain-soaked streets, the realization was equally clear and devastating. This was not a battle he could win with power or money. This was a fight that demanded patience, humility, and the courage to stay even when staying meant watching someone you loved suffer. Neither of them knew what the ending would be. But both of them knew they were no longer walking toward it alone. The rhythm of their lives shifted again, not suddenly, but decisively. What had once been cautious cooperation became quiet coordination, as if they were learning a language neither had expected to speak together. Michael no longer asked whether he could help. He waited for Emma to tell him how. That difference mattered more than any promise he could have made. Hospital visits became part of their routine. Emma insisted on handling the conversations with doctors herself, but Michael was always there, sitting slightly behind her, listening closely, memorizing every word. He learned the medical terms, the probabilities, the careful phrases doctors used when certainty was impossible. He never interrupted, never contradicted, and never let his wealth speak for him. For the first time in his life, power meant restraint. The twins sensed the seriousness of it all, even if they did not understand. The healthier one grew quieter, more observant, as if absorbing responsibility too large for his small frame. The other leaned heavily into familiar arms, his energy fluctuating unpredictably. Michael noticed how Emma masked her fear with routine, how she smiled when she needed to, and how her hands trembled only when she thought no one was looking. One evening, after a particularly long day, Emma finally allowed Michael to drive them home. The twins fell asleep in the back seat almost immediately, their heads resting against each other. The car was filled with silence, thick but not uncomfortable. "I don't know how to do this forever," Emma said suddenly, staring out the window. Michael kept his eyes on the road. "You don't have to," he replied. "You just have to do it today." She let out a slow breath, as if the simplicity of the answer had given her permission to stop planning for every possible disaster at once. That night, when the twins were asleep, Emma sat at the kitchen table with a stack of paperwork spread out before her. Medical forms, schedules, notes written in the margins. Michael stood nearby, unsure whether to step closer or stay back. "You can sit," she said quietly, without looking up. It was a small invitation, but it felt monumental. Michael sat across from her, careful not to touch anything unless she asked. They went through the papers together, methodically, calmly. Emma explained what she understood. Michael filled in gaps when he could, always checking her reaction before speaking. For the first time, the burden felt shared. "You're good at this," Emma said after a while, surprising herself as much as him. Michael met her gaze. "I'm trying to be." The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. She nodded and returned to the papers, but something inside her had shifted. She was no longer guarding every corner of her life. She was allowing space cautiously, deliberately. Later, as Michael prepared to leave, Emma walked him to the door. The hallway was dim, quiet, suspended between exhaustion and resolve. "I don't forgive you," she said softly. Michael nodded. "I know." "But," she continued after a pause, "I trust you not to disappear." The words landed heavily, more binding than forgiveness could ever be. Michael looked at her, emotion tightening his throat. "I won't," he said simply. When he left, Emma stood by the door longer than necessary, listening to his footsteps fade. She felt fear, yes, but she also felt something new taking shape beneath it. Stability. Not certainty, not safety, but the knowledge that when the hardest days came, she would not have to face them alone. And for Michael, walking out into the night, the weight of that trust settled deeply in his chest. It was not a reward. It was a responsibility. One he was finally ready to carry, no matter how heavy the road ahead became. The 11th chapter unfolded in a way none of them had anticipated, quietly and without warning, like a storm that arrives on a clear day. The morning began normally enough. Emma prepared breakfast while the twins argued softly over which cup belonged to whom, their voices still sleepy and uncoordinated. Michael arrived later than usual, his expression tense, carrying a sense of urgency that immediately set Emma on edge. One of the twins had not woken up well. His skin was warm, his movements slower, his eyes unfocused in a way Emma recognized instantly and dreaded every time. She moved into action without panic, her body responding before her thoughts could catch up. Michael watched her with a helpless ache, seeing how practiced she had become at hiding fear behind efficiency. They spent the day moving between waiting rooms and quiet corridors, the air heavy with antiseptic and unspoken possibilities. Doctors spoke carefully, choosing words designed not to alarm, but Emma heard what they were not saying just as clearly. Michael stayed close, never crowding, never interrupting, but always there when she needed to steady herself. The healthier twin sat beside his brother, holding his hand without being asked. Michael noticed it, and felt something break inside him. Children were not supposed to learn this kind of strength so early. By evening, they were sent home with instructions and uncertainty. Emma thanked the doctors calmly, as if gratitude could stabilize the ground beneath her feet. When they finally returned to the apartment, exhaustion settled over them like a physical weight. The twins fell asleep quickly, tangled together, unaware of how close the day had come to changing everything. Emma stood in the doorway of their room for a long time, watching them breathe. Michael stood behind her, close enough that she could feel his presence without turning around. "I don't know how much longer I can pretend I'm not afraid," she said quietly. "You don't have to pretend with me," Michael replied. She turned then, and for the first time since they had reconnected, she let herself lean into him. Not fully, not completely, but enough to admit how tired she was. Michael wrapped his arms around her carefully, as if she might break, holding her without trying to fix anything. "I missed everything," he said softly, "and I would give anything to take it back." Emma closed her eyes, resting her forehead against his chest. "I don't need you to take it back," she said. "I need you to stay." Michael tightened his hold slightly, the promise settling deep inside him. "I'm not going anywhere." Later that night, they sat together in silence, the apartment dim and quiet. The world outside continued on, indifferent as ever, but inside those walls something fragile yet powerful had formed. Not certainty, not peace, but commitment. Michael understood then that love did not always arrive with happiness or relief. Sometimes it arrived wrapped in fear and responsibility, demanding everything you had without guaranteeing anything in return. And he accepted that completely. Because for the first time in his life, he knew exactly where he belonged. Time did not stop, no matter how much Emma wished it would. It moved forward relentlessly, indifferent to love, fear, or hope. The treatment slowed the illness but could not erase it, and both Emma and Michael understood this long before anyone said it out loud. What mattered was not how long they had, but how they used what remained. Emma grew weaker quietly. There was no dramatic collapse, no final warning. She simply became more tired, her movements slower, her smiles softer, as if she were already learning how to let go. Michael noticed everything. He memorized the sound of her voice, the way she brushed the twins' hair, the way she looked at them when she thought no one was watching. The boys did not understand death, but they understood change. They stayed closer to her, climbed into her bed more often, and fell asleep holding her hands. Emma never cried in front of them. She told stories instead, gentle ones, filled with warmth and laughter, planting memories she hoped would grow even after she was gone. One night, when the twins were already asleep, Emma asked Michael to sit beside her. "You'll stay," she said quietly, not as a question. Michael nodded, his throat tight. "Always." She looked at him for a long time, her brown eyes calm, no fear left in them. "Make sure they remember me happy," she whispered. "Not sick." "I promise," he said, his voice breaking despite himself. Emma smiled faintly and closed her eyes. She passed away before morning, peacefully, without pain, her hand resting in Michael's. When he realized she was gone, he did not cry immediately. He simply sat there, frozen, knowing that something irreplaceable had left the world. The funeral was small. Michael held the twins' hands as they stood beside him, too young to fully understand, but old enough to feel the weight of loss. He told them the truth in words they could understand. That their mother loved them more than anything. That she was not gone from them, only from sight. Life after Emma was quieter. He moved them away from the old apartment, not to erase her, but to give them space to grow. Michael became not just their father, but their anchor. He read the stories Emma used to tell. He cooked the meals she once made. He spoke her name often, refusing to let her become a memory whispered instead of spoken. Years later, the twins would remember her laugh, her warmth, her voice telling them they were safe. They would remember a mother who stayed strong until the very end. Michael never called his life happy. But it was full. And every single day he stayed. The author of this story sees it as a reminder that life does not always give us the chance to fix everything in time. Sometimes love comes too late, and understanding arrives only after the highest price has already been paid. This story teaches that responsibility cannot be postponed, feelings cannot be ignored, and every choice we make will eventually return to us, even if we hope the past has been left behind. The story shows that true love is not expressed through loud words or grand promises, but through the willingness to stay when it hurts, when it is frightening, and when nothing can be changed anymore. Emma's death is not a punishment, but a reminder of the value of time and presence. Michael's journey is one of redemption, where love continues even after death, transforming into care, memory, and loyalty. This story was fully imagined and written by the author. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental.